I'm a minister, and for many years I was on the evangelism staff of American Baptist churches, traveling around the country working with local churches and regions about reaching people with the good news of Jesus Christ. Now, out of this work, I happened to meet another Baptist minister who was working with evangelism in the Great Rivers. His name was Madison Bittner. And I'm raising this because it seems to me that the world that the church is in now, the old idea of testimony, where we tell about what God has done in our lives that have lifted us up and others, is very relevant. Through my friend Madison, I learned about a sermon that was preached by my mentor, Reverend Jutsu Morikawa, in which he said that every religious person who was a professional should be involved at some point in the life of their community to make it a better place to live. And my friend said, "Oh, I heard that sermon and it kind of rang a bell." But at the same time, I thought about, here I am traveling all over, never having time enough for my family. Why would I get involved in the community? And then some months later, he noticed that his nephew, who had a disability, could get no help from anywhere in the community. And the family did what they could, but more was needed. And he finally decided he would form an association to help people like his nephew. And he said, it was amazing. It was like God did amazing things. And more people came and we raised money. And of course, he said, the struggles we dealt with got bigger and bigger too. Well, that filed away in my mind. And I thought, my. But I was busy. And yet it kind of was there. Sometime later, when I was fishing French Creek, I've always loved to fish for bass and trout. And I was out on my spring-May trip to French Creek, just a few days away from work and from family responsibilities. And after I'd been fishing that day, as I was getting ready to quit, and I was lifting my foot onto the bank, all of a sudden I thought, French Creek, like so many streams I've seen across the country, is being destroyed by development. More roads, more houses, more no trespassing signs. And soon this is going to wash away French Creek. And I thought, I just can't stand to see another stream destroyed. And then as I was lifting my other foot up onto the bank, I realized that if I wanted to do something, I would have to organize. And I also realized the last thing I wanted to do was to organize something regarding fishing, because that was my time to get away. And yet I thought, I've got to do something. And I knew that meant creating some kind of an organization, a voluntary association for change, because that's how Protestant Americans and Catholics and Jews actually have changed America, like with the women's suffrage movement or the civil rights movement. Only if people organize for good does anything happen. I knew that. All this went through my mind in just a second. And when I pulled my other leg up onto the bank to start walking, I knew I was going to do something here. That's the testimony. And the next part of the testimony is what happened. We created, a friend of mine, Chuck Marshall, and I founded what became the Valley Forge chapter of Trout Unlimited. And for the first 3 years, it was like being rats in a maze. We did what the cookbook said that we had, and that was hold a board meeting every month and chapter meetings frequently. And we did that, and every day when we had a meeting, a faithful few and fewer came, until finally, after a couple years, we had a summer meeting at my house, and only one person came, Al Frankel, who was an organizational development counselor who worked at that point with President Carter. and we talked for a while about his work, which he found difficult. And then he said to me as we were walking down the driveway, he said, "Owen, are you willing to let this die if people don't support it?" And I said, "Al," and through my mind, you know how your minds are, you can think of all kinds of things at once, even as you're reflecting on something. And I thought about Jesus' teaching about the seed and the sower, and the seed wouldn't bear fruit unless it fell in the ground and died. And I immediately, it was clear to me that if people didn't support it, I would let this die. They've just forced that decision right out into the open. And so from that time on, for the next few months, I started watching what was happening. Were people going to support the chapter, this struggling new entity? What would happen at the meetings? And for the first few months, the faithful 8 or 10 people came to both the board meeting and to the chapter meeting, no new people. And then we had invited Dr. Ralph Heister, who was the biology teacher at Conestoga High School, who had taken his students out to study Valley Creek. And they decided, he told us, that unless something was done, within not too long, Valley Creek would be a series of stinking mud holes in the summertime, contaminated with sewage and smelling of raw sewage. And he said something has got to be done. And then he showed us pictures of the big landfill, the Knickerbocker landfill. And he pointed out that the pictures showed that the lining was cracked, and we could see big drums of toxic material that were on their sides leaking down. And he had gotten in there with his students because they had a man with a shotgun all the time. But on Sunday morning, they didn't have anybody there. So they went in on Sunday morning to see what was going on, and they brought back these pictures. Now, what happened in the chapter meeting was people began to say, "This is terrible. If we don't do something, nobody's going to do something. We've got to do something. What can we do?" And out of that meeting, you could feel energy flowing into the group, because somehow, as a whole group, we felt we needed to move to preserve, protect, and restore Valley Creek, which was this lovely gem of Chester County, which was being afflicted by, at that point, sewage, development, and the toxic poisons coming out of not only the landfill, but what we later learned were 7 or 8 different sites which were declared to be Superfund sites. So all the people living around them were getting poisoned too, but nobody wanted to look at it or even think about it. But all of that was going on. That's how we got started. And my feeling is still, in terms of that, everything that happened since then kind of is a testimony to, as our parents and grandparents would have said, to the glory of God, because it is God who is out in front, restoring, healing, helping people and land. As people used to say in the old soil and water conservation movement, healthy land, healthy people. The same thing is true of water, unless maybe you don't drink any soft drinks or beer or water, because if you don't need to worry about water. But if you happen to drink it in any form, it's pretty important. And if it's poisoned, it is very important to get it cleaned up. That's the first part of the presentation.
And so, remind us, Owen, exactly, you said you're a pastor.
Yes.
What other responsibilities have you had? You're involved with many organizations?
I'm the co-chair with Rabbi Warren Stone of the Religious Coalition for Creation Care. Now, after I retired from active ministry in the American Baptist Home Mission Societies, I decided I needed to study the Bible to see what God was saying to us in the scriptures about how and why we deal with these ecology justice crises, which are coming down on us. Basically, that we human beings have disordered the creation, kind of unraveled it. And it's like with this virus, if we hadn't created a world transportation system and a world disease system, we wouldn't be afflicted by this in the way we are now, just the way that the flu was in 1917. But we did. And more than that, we've disordered the very structures that are life-giving and life-sustaining. So, and it always affects people who are the poorest, like this crisis, as it develops. The people who will be left losing the most will be the people who are on the bottom. That's the justice issue of ecology. And the other side of it is that if we can restore the land and the water and the rivers, as we did when we passed the Clean Water Act and saw rivers across the country moving toward being fishable and swimmable again. It's kind of like amazing. But it is the kind of miracle where God is involved, where we human beings turn from the way of death to the way of life. That's why I studied the Bible. And I wrote this book after 15 years on spiritual help in hard times, because we're going to move into hard times. There's no question about that. But there is a question about whether we get angry and bitter and hateful, or whether we turn to the one who is loving, good, and just, and restoring the world in every way.